Thanks for joining us on another For Investors, By Investors South Bay podcast. As always, we are proud to be your all-education real estate investment resource without any kind of sales pitch. If you would like to attend one of our meetings in person, we meet the second Wednesday of the month at The Point in El Segundo. You can RSVP at forinvestorsbyinvestors.com/South Bay. To find more investment resources such as blogs and podcasts from other FIBI groups, go to forinvestorsbyinvestors.com and search our library. Now, on to the podcast.
Thank you guys very much for coming today. We really appreciate it. So who here is the first time to a FIBI event? Okay. Thank you guys very much for coming. Appreciate it. You guys will not get sold anything here. Okay, so it's our entire philosophy here is no sales pitch, real estate investing and networking. So our goal is to try to teach as much as we can without that kind of sales pitch involved. And so we bring in different educators to try to teach and show people different aspects of real estate investing. Today we're doing investing in real estate for your children. What do we got going on next week?
Protecting your real estate assets.
There you go.
I wrote that.
So, yeah. Nice. So
my ex-ad days.
Yeah. So you don't want to use mine? Well,
No.
I can remember.
No.
Yes.
So Matt was something about not being a gangster real estate investor.
I said investing in real estate like a gangster. That's what I said, and he's like, "No, nobody's gonna like that." I'm like, "That'll be funny, dude. What the heck? Maybe I'm just my CPA humor. I don't know."
Yeah.
So, but anyways, so those of you guys who don't know, For Investors by Investors was started by a couple of full-time investors that were tired of getting that pitch involved, and I became a partner, and Dave became a partner afterwards because we really love the philosophy involved. And I run the Long Beach group, and Dave and I run this group. The Long Beach one is more like a panel, or a U-shaped discussion where we have everything set up kind of like a round table, and then this one's more of a panel type discussion. We have FIBI Orange County and Pasadena as well, very big clubs, and then we have some annual memberships that Dave will tell you about in a second. So,
I actually have my own mic. You have your own mic, yeah. So how you guys doing tonight? Good, thanks for coming. So as Matt said, one of the things that as we've been growing the brand of FIBI is we do have what's now considered an annual membership. So if you're coming to FIBI a lot and you want to save some money per meeting, you can either join as a member of one particular club. So if you want to just join like this club or Matt's club, it's a $200, $199 a year. If you want to buy a membership for all the FIBI clubs that will get you into any FIBI club, including the all chapter network meetings, that's $299 a year. So if you're interested in that, see Matt or I, you can also go on our website. We've got the information up on the website. As Matt said, we're clearly here about networking and education. There's no sales pitch allowed. We're not here to sell anything. And because of that, the only revenue we make from FIBI is from the $20 at the door that we got, or $25 depending on whether or not you RSVP in advance. We do have some sponsors that we want to thank. A few of them are here tonight. Actually, one of them is Karn Hall with UDirect, who's one of our panelists tonight. She runs UDirect IRA, which is a self-directed IRA custodian company. Spiro Woodward is here. Actually, Michelle is here from Spiro Woodward.
Hey.
They're a local attorney. They do real estate and business law. Yes. And I think Stephen, her boss, has probably forgotten more about real estate than I'll ever know. He's going to be a panelist next month, so he's going to be talking about protecting your real estate assets next month. Farmer Insurance, Jesse's. I don't see anyone from his offices here, but they're a local farmers group. They're a sponsor. New Western is also a sponsor. They do wholesaling, which, by the way, we have flyers for all of our companies back there as well, that if you're looking for more information on any of those. And then, of course, OCG and my company, Co-Real Estate Team, we also are sponsors of this group. And then we've got two corporate sponsors, More Financial, which is a hard money lender, and then also the Chase Law Group, which is right across the street. What's that? Oh, yeah, and then Kyle Mealy, speaking of sponsors, another one of our sponsors. I saw Karn and then I just got distracted and I forgot. So Kyle's a local CPA and does our returns for FIBI and is a good local guy. So tonight we're going to talk about investing in real estate for your children, which is kind of a discussion on investing through generations, Brian here's a trust attorney, so we're going to be talking a lot about using trust in different kind of structures and some of the taxation issues on real estate, especially as you're transferring real estate from generation to generation or just holding real estate for long periods of time. So we're really excited about tonight and getting started. If you, at any point in time, if you have to get up and use the restroom, the doors should be open. If not, there's a key up front, so just go ahead and walk back up front, and the restrooms are over there. And if you guys got to get up, stretch your legs, grab a cup of coffee, grab some water, grab a beer, help yourselves. Okay, well, let's start off with doing some introductions. Brian, are you live? You're good there on your mic?
How am I sounding, guys?
Introduce yourself.
All right. So my name is Brian Chow. I am a California State Bar Certified Specialist in Estate Planning, Trust, and Probate Law. What does that really mean for you guys? It means that I help my clients to plan for what happens in the event of death or incapacity and make sure that they pass their assets on to their loved ones by minimizing taxes and maximizing whatever legacy it is that they want to leave. I also specialize in asset protection and business succession planning. So helping clients to structure their assets to make it more difficult for people to sue them, and also planning for their business so that when unexpected things happen, the business can continue to operate and thrive.
So my personal trust is with Brian's company did it, so they're put it all together. So yay, isn't that nice? Like if you pass away, then it doesn't go through probate. Okay. My name's Karen, and my company is UDirect IRA Services. So we help you take your retirement money, even probably saving from your old jobs or so forth, and invested in real estate, invested in alternative assets outside the stock market. So it could be like real estate, it could be precious metals, it could be private stock, notes, secured and unsecured notes. You could buy performing, non-performing debt in self-directed IRAs, precious metals if I didn't say it, lots of different things. So self-directed IRAs, and we've helped over 3,700 people self-direct their IRAs. And as a result, we're sitting on like 370 million in assets. Can you believe that? Nutty? Wow. Because I knew these guys at the beginning. So there you go, self-directed IRAs.
Very much so. Kyle Mealy, I'm the owner of South Bay Tax and Financial Consulting. We do tax planning, tax preparation, and tax representation for closely held companies, individuals, trusts, estates, pretty much any type of tax return, we'll do it. And we focus primarily on closely held businesses and helping them kind of structure long-term what they're going to do with their business assets, work closely with a lot of estate planning advisors and financial advisors to help make sure the tax plan fits into the larger financial plan, which I'm sure we'll get a lot of synergy in today's discussion. So.
And keep in mind, guys, because of the smaller group tonight, we definitely would love for for you guys to ask questions, be involved, learn what you guys want to learn. There's a perfect opportunity to do this. You got some great people up here that really know this side of things that can really help. So my name is Matthew Owens. I'm a California licensed CPA, non-practicing. I can't pay the IRS money anymore. It drives me nuts. But and deal with that whole headache. I got to pay Kyle for that because it's a lot easier. He knows a lot more than I do about it because he's practicing still. I primarily flip houses, so I flip about 10 houses a month right now. We've flipped over 500 now in the last 10 years, and we buy a lot of value-add multifamilies. We invest in syndications and promissory notes, and I help a lot of people with their financial situation and understanding what their cash flow structures should be or shouldn't be, or what different strategies they can utilize when they're investing. So, but it's a lot more fun than doing taxes, man. I'm telling you, you got to come over to see the light, Kyle. See the light. I'm telling you. So.
David Coe, I'm a local realtor. Actually, this is my office here at Keller Williams South Bay. We spend a lot of time working with investors. We do some light commercial. We do a lot of residential, but we really specialize in dealing with complex real estate situations. We have a listing right now where with the buyer and the seller are going through a divorce, and one of the divorcees is currently incarcerated, and we're having to navigate that kind of situation on real estate. So we love that tricky stuff. So that's what we do. One thing we forgot to say up front here is that the information that we're going to present today is purely educational at this point in time. While we do have some attorneys and CPAs up here, we're not here to give legal or tax advice. So any information you get through here, if you want to translate it to your own local situation, personal situation, please consult with your advisors. And if you need some help, we'll refer one.
AKA, don't sue us for anything you hear here.
That's what that means, yeah. And it's on tape.
Sprinkle some salt on all the advice.
Yeah, right. All right, cool. So let's get started. So we're going to start off first talking about structures, right? And why don't you guys each go through? Brian, go first. Talk about just some of the different kinds of structures that you guys use on a daily basis when you're looking at both succession planning and in particular with real estate.
Sure, thanks, Dave. So the goal of today is to talk about in real estate investing for our children, right? And so that can take shape in a number of different ways. What does it mean when we do real estate investing for our children? Does it mean that we're buying them houses and putting their names on title? Is that a good idea? I don't know. Sometimes it could be a great idea. Sometimes it's a terrible idea. It could be purchasing these properties and investing in and building wealth so that we can pass on an income stream to them when we pass away, or setting things up so that if something happens to us, that everything goes to them smoothly, or that it can continue to be managed for them down the road. What I think most people, when they're investing, usually when they're starting out, they're usually thinking about, hey, how do I build wealth and accumulate these assets so that I have something to pass down to my children? And as they grow, maybe they need money for college. How do I make sure that I have enough resources to raise them and accomplish whatever goals it is that I have for them? So in that vein, probably the main structure that I utilize with my clients is revocable living trusts. And so that's the thing that touches the most amount of the population. And what a revocable living trust is basically it's a vehicle for you to be able to manage assets easily during the course of your lifetime, but also building in legal mechanisms so that the people that you want have the ability to step in and manage things in accordance with whatever goals or wishes is that you have when something unexpected happens. So if you either die, you suffer a stroke, you have Alzheimer's or dementia, you're in a car accident, you're in a coma. At that point, you no longer have the ability to make those decisions that you take for granted from day to day as to how you want your life to be run. And if you don't have a plan in place, then your loved ones have to scramble. They have to try to figure everything out. And a lot of negative things can happen, right? If you don't tell people what you want to happen, oftentimes what you want doesn't end up going where you want it to go because guess what? Loved ones are pulling in different directions. You have the government, you have creditors all pulling in different directions with different agendas. And so laying all that stuff out and articulating that really allows you to not only ensure that your assets go the way that you want it to go, it also minimizes the potential for conflict. And it also makes life a lot easier for your loved ones because the way we can set this up is so that we can accomplish all this without having to go to court. Because usually if you don't plan properly, all of your assets end up in court, either in probate, which many of you have probably heard of, and or in a conservatorship or a guardianship hearing as well, which is essentially a court hearing to figure out what to do with your stuff while you're still alive, and that really sucks. But we'll touch more on that as we go.
So an IRA is an IRA, right? But what makes it self-directed is the kind of asset you can put in that IRA. That's what self-directed IRAs do. So it could be, you could, like I mentioned, all the different kinds of assets, but the kinds of IRAs are traditional, Roth, SEP, simple, inherited, spousal IRAs. We do the solo 401k. Those are the structures. Each one is a little bit different. Each one has different rules. Some you have to be self-employed. Some are pre-tax, some are after-tax. So you really talk to your tax advisor and decide which kind of IRA is best for you. But then when you're going to use it for a self-directed IRA and use it to invest in, there are a couple of things that are unusual when you're investing. One of the things is that we sign your investment docs. You don't sign. We sign on behalf of the IRA. So the name of the buyer or the owner of the asset will be the custodian for the benefit of your IRA and not you personally. So that's really, really interesting. I mean, that's something you might not even expect. And so when you're structuring it, that's one of the things you have to keep in mind is the vesting, I would say. But it's a structure that allows you to invest tax-free or tax-deferred, which is what is so amazing. Unless, of course, you take on leverage or run an active business, but that's the advanced class.
So does everybody here, who doesn't understand what a self-directed IRA is? Because it's been around for a while, but a lot of times, a lot of people don't know about it. It's not something that's taught, right? So people don't teach this type of stuff. Does everybody understand? Okay, so a self-directed IRA is basically just like a normal IRA that you might have with Fidelity or Schwab or anything like that. But if you put it with another custodian, like UDirect IRA, then they allow you to self-direct it into any outside investments that you want. You're not limited to stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and things like that. You're able to invest it in real estate, in promissory notes, in outside stock that, you know, you were to buy shares of a business or something like that. You can invest in it.
Hired.
So, it's just, I've explained this 500 times to clients. So basically, you know, when you're doing this, you want to be able to understand the only major difference is that you can invest it in what you want, with some few limited exceptions like life insurance and collectibles and things like that. At the same time, those other custodians, like the Fidelities and Schwabs, they're not required by law to disclose to you how much money they make off of you. They make money off of every trade you do, and so they're taking tons of your return away every single time. But they're not. That's not disclosed to you. What is the annual fee with UDirect? It's like $200.
It's $275 a flat fee.
So which is way less than, you know, any other portfolio or any other IRA company that you see out there.
Well, just like that, like what you're saying, like if your IRA had a house and you sold it, and you made say $100,000 profit in your IRA, that money went back in your IRA. If it was with Charles Schwab or something like that, they would be taking a cut of that profit that just went back in, but we're not getting a cut of the profit that goes back into your IRA. You keep 100% of the return. Your IRA keeps it.
They just allow a platform to be able to invest in what you want to invest in and take control of your own retirement, which I think, in my opinion, is probably the biggest benefit. You're in control now of your retirement. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't be an idiot and, you know, and make giant mistakes and cost you a lot of money, which makes it really, really important to get educated, you know, on how you protect yourself when you're investing that money. You know, that's not the check the box of a risky, medium, or low anymore. You actually have to take responsibility, right? So
you really do, because you're coming in as the asset sponsor, or as the expert, the asset expert, or the investing expert. So we don't ever tell you what to invest in, kind of like FIBI, we're not going to sell you anything. We don't sell anything at all except our service. So then you are bringing this asset to us saying, I'd like my IRA to invest in this asset. So you're the one that needs to monitor it. You need to make sure that maybe it's your IRA lent money to somebody so that they could buy a property. You need to make sure that that money's coming into your IRA every month. You can log into your account and check so that you can see that. But you're the one that needs to be on top of it, making sure it's happened. We do the tax reporting and record keeping on all the accounts. But it is truly self-directed, so you really, no one's holding your hand through this. We're here to help if you need, if you need help, because you may have questions. Did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I'll walk up, but I'm sure I'm going that. So, I've heard really, really great things about UDirect IRA. I have a lot of clients who really want to do it. The issue that they run into, and maybe some good lawyers and CPAs that are thinking about this out here too, is where the complication comes is getting that money from their IRA into the UDirect IRA and being able to qualify for certain loan programs. A lot of times it's a much higher down payment.
I can talk about that.
Okay.
Sure. So if you take your money, if you're moving your money from an IRA or a 401k, it's not a taxable event. It's a custodian to custodian transfer, and it's not taxable, so you can do that. But if you want to have your IRA invest in real estate, for example, and you want to leverage, well, that adds a layer of complexity to it, so I'll explain this. If your IRA earns money because you saved, then that money is tax-free or tax-deferred. But if your IRA earns money because you borrowed money, so you didn't even save this money, you just borrowed it and earned more money, the profit you make from borrowed money is taxable. And it's called UDFI, Unrelated Debt Financed Income Tax. So say, for example, your IRA buys a house, and say it's $100,000, your rent is $1,000 a month that your renters are paying back to your IRA, but it's 60% from IRA and 40% leveraged. So that means that every month you get that $1,000 rent payment into your IRA. Well, $400 of it you receive because of leverage. And so that $400 is taxable with this UDFI. So your IRA has to actually file a return called a 990T and pay this tax, which can be as much as the trust rate, which I believe is 39.6% on the top. I mean, the first $1,000 is not considered, but
Well, so to add a layer of complexity.
Yes, please. Go for it.
All right, so
make it interesting.
So some people have been advising us to create LLCs to purchase the property under, because that's the way to.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Right. Okay. So anybody ever hear of a checkbook IRA? Checkbook IRA. Yeah. So it's the worst way to describe it. It's kind of accurate, but not. So people will call me and say, well, I just opened a self-directed IRA. When do I get my checkbook? And it doesn't work like that. So just real quick, the IRA is self-directed. You open it, you fund it, and then if you want to have an IRA-owned LLC, you have a third party, an attorney, create it for you. Your IRA buys 100% of the initial units of that LLC. Now it's a special purpose LLC, so it has special language in it. So now the money went from your IRA into the LLC's checking account. You as a member have check writing authority and can write the checks. But let's talk about this. So the reason that my company even exists at all is because IRS doesn't want you to have like personal possession of your money. So when you do with this IRA-owned LLC, well, I'll tell you what, the IRS and the Department of Treasury, they really kind of hate it, even though you've been able to do it since about 1996. Swanson v. Commissioner was the ruling that created it. So this exists, and it's a tool. Do you have to use it? No. Your IRA could buy the real estate straight up. But then, of course, you could talk to Brian about asset protection. How much asset protection does that give you? But it certainly doesn't protect you from so if your IRA-owned LLC were to buy a house, and then your IRA-owned LLC acquired non-recourse leverage to buy that house, you'd still owe the UDFI tax. It would be the same. Because it's like an umbrella. The IRA above, and then the LLC is owned by the IRA. Yes?
It's my understanding that if you use Roth dollars, that goes away. Is that right?
No.
But if you use 401k dollars, you can get out of the exemption.
Boom, shakalaka, boom. Yeah.
So solo Ks, which you can also self-direct, are exempt from that UDFI. So that's one way of trying to get around that taxation, is have the client qualify for an individual 401k plan.
With no employees in any of the companies that they own, they can get a solo K. It's not, the solo K is not subject to the UDFI tax. That's good.
What's the rationale for that? The tax rationale?
Okay, all right. So
You're asking for any
we're like
tax
diving into the
rationale.
weeds here, guys.
Right.
I just wanted to
Kyle, can you please explain the IRS?
Okay, well,
Oh my God.
Yeah, right.
let's think just the battery. Okay, let's think about, thank you. Hi, this works. Boy, this works like crazy. So our good friend, the Catholic Church, right? So here's this Catholic church, and they decided that they're going to open a bakery. So they open a bakery across the street. And so the church is running this bakery. Well, guess what? It's an unrelated business. The bakery is unrelated to the business of running a church. And so then there's Joe, and he has a bakery on the next block. Well, he has to charge his customers more because he has to pay tax, but the Catholic Church is tax exempt. So the IRS comes in on their white steed and saves the day by taxing the Catholic Church and making it even, and everybody's happy, right? Kind of not, but that's how it works. So to make it even, so an IRA is tax exempt, a church is tax exempt, and if you're earning money that's not related to, the business of what you're doing, that's UDFI, unrelated debt financed income tax.
Thing on your question there, that the checkbook LLC, so to speak, it's a single member LLC, meaning that the IRA is the only owner of that LLC. So from the IRS's eyes, it's a disregarded entity. Basically, it doesn't exist for tax purposes. So everything that the single member LLC is doing is reported under the IRA regardless. So that's why it's still subject to this UDFI. It still has to file a 990T if it's taking out leverage. It just doesn't exist. It's just kind of a shell that's sitting there as a placeholder. All that stuff.
They're going to get you one way or the other.
Of course.
For UDFI, absolutely.
Yeah. And so you can have an IRA-owned LLC. You can do that. This checkbook IRA. You can do that, but why would you want to? Because if you're not using it and you're passing all the deals through like UDirect, we're going to look at all of them and give you not necessarily an opinion, but we're going to say, hey, I think this is a prohibited transaction. I had somebody call me today and they were just really hammering me. They wanted to buy private stock, but then they were going to become an advisor to the company, and that's a prohibited transaction. So if they were doing it with a checkbook IRA, he'd just write that check and make that investment and go ahead and advise the company and commit a prohibited transaction. So I think just in a nutshell, the self-directed IRA game is like a game of keep away, and it's keeping away from these prohibited transactions. Because if you commit one, you've got, first off, the IRS says, okay, that's not an IRA anymore, you just earned that income. And they go back to the date of the infraction, and then you owe income tax as though it was your money from the date of the infraction forward. So maybe it was like, in 2000. Well, now you owe all this back tax and penalties and so forth, so it could get really nasty.
Say goodbye to the IRA.
Yeah, say goodbye to the IRA is gone, so that's what happens. That's the lose button on the IRA game. The self-directed IRA game is the prohibited transaction. So if you've got an IRA-owned LLC, you don't know if you even committed one, but if you don't have it and we're looking at your deals, we'll be able to tell you if we see one.
Keep in mind, guys, too, just to clarify, because I don't want you to be scared to death about opening an IRA after all the talk about, all the losses and, the taxes and everything. To be honest with your question, you may be making it a little more complex than it needs to be. Really, the only thing that needs to be done is they need to transfer their funds from a Fidelity Schwab type account over to like a UDirect account. And anytime they want to invest, they just say, okay, UDirect, here's all the paperwork, here's the direction form, I want you to send the money to there, and they will send the money to there.
I know it's that they're trying to qualify for a specific loan.
What kind of loan?
Well, we're drifting into the rabbit hole here, so let's move on. And Kyle, we want to talk about, we're talking about structures, right? So we talked about trust, we talked about IRAs and different structures through that. From your daily work, and again, we're talking more about generational wealth and protecting from a tax standpoint. Talk about some of the stuff that you see on a daily basis.
Yes, the IRS code is rife with a lot of towards property ownership, and especially multi-generational incentives. So a lot of that would be things like 1031 exchanges, step up in basis rules for assets that are held when you pass away as well. So there's a lot of tools that you can use for these really long-term plans to take assets that might have been purchased for a very low amount that are very highly appreciated. A lot of this real estate in Manhattan Beach qualifies where every day we're dealing with assets that might have appreciated millions of dollars since they were purchased. And so you've got all this kind of built-in tax gains that are there that if they were sold would be triggering a massive taxable event where the owner might owe hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in tax in some cases. And there's a lot of tools within the code to basically defer that tax indefinitely or defer for a long period of time at least. So and a lot of that can flow from one generation to the next. So I'm sure we'll get into a lot more about step up in basis, but that's a really kind of critical tool for why passing down real estate is a huge benefit to your beneficiaries. They basically get to reset their tax basis in a property upon passing, depending on a bunch of facts and circumstances, but in general, that's the rule. And so then if they were to sell that property, they might not owe any tax at all, whereas if the original owner had sold it, it's $1 in tax. So.
And that might be one reason why you might not give properties to your children while you're living or name them on title to your property while you're living, because you may be foregoing a portion of that step up in basis. The other thing, Kyle, that I think while we're on the subject of tax benefits for intergenerational transfers is property tax. So living here in California, how many homeowners do we have here in California? How many of you know what Prop 13 is? Yeah, Prop 13, that's a big deal, right? So, so for those of you who don't know, property taxes in California in the 70s, basically, California voters decided that, hey, with California real estate rising so quickly, property taxes were getting out of hand. So Prop 13 is basically a limit on how much your property taxes can rise every year, and it's limited to 2%, tracked to how much your property grows in any given year. So what happens is if you hold the property for a long time, your property tax basis is going to be very low relative to the fair market value of the real estate that you own. And when you pass it on, right, whenever you change title to property, that's when the government strikes and they swoop in and they say, nah, we got you, now we can reassess the property. But there are certain exceptions to that. So if you're transferring property from a parent to a child, or if you're transferring property from a grandparent to a grandchild in a situation where the intervening parent has passed away, then you can qualify for exemptions from Prop 13. So you can pass on a certain amount of real estate to your children without being subject to the property taxes being reassessed. And this actually occurs whether or not you're doing it at death or whether you're doing it during your lifetime. Purchase, sale, or gift, it doesn't matter. But that's another intergenerational transfer that the tax code incentivizes as well.
Is that Prop what, 80?
It's Prop 62 and Prop 183, I think.
183. So basically, you don't get to change the basis like Kyle was talking about, but you can maintain super low property tax rates.
You can do both.
If you do it at death, you can do both.
At
But if you're just doing it during lifetime, you wouldn't get a step up in basis. But if you're transferring it to your child and you haven't transferred, well, I think it's the value of your primary residence plus $1 million of assessed value. So whatever shows up on the tax rolls. So if you've been holding a property for a long time, it might be worth a couple $1 million, but on the assessor's rolls, it might only be $1 million, right? So it just depends on what's showing up on the assessor's tax roll. Yes.
I have a question back, Kyle, when you were talking about 1031 transfers. If there's $1 million of built-in long-term capital gains, say the investor wants to defer, let's say 900,000 and wants to keep 100,000, can they do that? Because I know there's supposed to be like a ratio of debt that you have to 1031 over. So can they just say, I need $100,000 now, but I want to defer 900? Can you do that?
Yes, that's a partial 1031 exchange, and effectively the IRS will tax some portion of the cash you pull out of the transaction. Okay. It's called boot, and it's dependent on the amount of debt that's on the original property that's owned, the amount of debt on the replacement property, and the amount of cash that's transferred between those properties as well. Okay. So there's a formula basically plug in that will determine how much of that cash is taxable and at what rate as well, effectively. Okay. But yeah, absolutely possible and commonly utilized as well.
How detailed is your 1031 exchange spreadsheet? So, because I know I've seen those things. They are not fun to deal with. The calculations on these things are a mess.
That's why you got to practice.
Yes, I'm like, I did one of them and I'm like, I quit. It's not fun. So, Brian, can you talk a little bit about when you sit down with somebody on initial estate plan, what are some of the key things that you want to understand about their financial situation, and what are some of the planning techniques that you may use to try to focus on saying, and I know this is a very broad question because I don't have a specific person in mind, you know. So what are some of the specific planning techniques that you use when you're trying to say, okay, let's transfer as much to your heirs as possible, you know, and protect you and make sure that it's set up for yourself down the line?
Sure, this is a very broad question. Okay, so when I'm meeting with clients, there are a number of things that we want to consider, a number of lenses through which we want to look through from a planning perspective. One very obvious one is, as I alluded to before, how do we make life as easy as possible for your loved ones to carry out your wishes in the event of your death or incapacity? That's fairly straightforward. That's usually accomplished in large part with your revocable living trust or a basic estate plan. But beyond that, there are other things. When you're getting into the planning for every specific family, different families are different, right? And specifically when we're talking about children, not all children are the same. How many of you have more than one children? And how do they act consistently with one another? No, right? They're all different. They all have different needs and issues. And so some children are go-getters. They might become a doctor or a lawyer. They may become very successful on their own. They may not need a whole lot of hand-holding from mom and dad. There might be his little brother who's kind of the failure to launch. He's just hanging out at home playing video games and doesn't really know how to manage money very well. We might have another child that's a special needs child. Maybe they really can't be trusted with money. They can't be managing things. So let's talk about each child and what particular issues those might come up, right? So let's say the first child, he's the hard driver. He's a orthopedic surgeon, and he's going to be super successful. We anticipate he's going to be worth millions of dollars on his own, but he's an orthopedic surgeon. And guess what? Do surgeons get sued? Yeah, they get sued all the time, right? So he's in a high liability field, and he's got a lot of assets too. So we're like, okay, do we really want to give millions of dollars directly to this child when he's already got a bunch of money on his own, right? One, that money, if we just leave it directly to him, well, he's got a high litigation risk. So the more money we give him, the more we're potentially exposing to the surgeon's creditors. We may not want to just leave it to him directly. Another issue is he's got a lot of money on his own. He's going to be worth millions of dollars, if not tens of millions of dollars at the time that he passes away. So if we leave him several millions of dollars on top of that, well, guess what? We're creating potentially an estate tax problem. Does anyone here know what the estate tax is? So the estate tax is basically a tax that the government places on your assets when you die. So the government basically says, okay.
Double taxation.
Yeah, think about all the taxes that you paid during your lifetime. You got your income tax, you got capital gains tax, you got sales tax, you've got, Melrose if you're living in Orange County, right? You've got your, all sorts of taxes. And above and beyond that, the government says, okay, when you die, we're going to calculate your net worth. We're going to figure out what's the value of all the assets you own. We're going to net out any liabilities you have, like your mortgage or credit card bills, etc., and we're going to come up with a number. Whatever that number is that you're passing on to your loved ones is going to be subject to a 40% tax, okay? Now, the good news is, before you guys fall out of your chair, is the government allows you an exemption. So you can protect a certain amount and pass it on to your loved ones without being subject to this tax. In this year, currently, that amount is roughly $5.5 million per spouse. So if you're a married couple, good news, you can pass on roughly $11 million to your children. Cool. But if you're passing on a big sum of assets to your children who are already going to be worth several millions of dollars, we don't want to be adding on to their estate tax bill when they pass away. So one thing that we might do in that situation is leave those assets in trust to that child and set it up so that the money that we're passing down to them, we're not leaving it to the orthopedic surgeon directly. It's going to be held in a separate entity that's legally required to utilize those assets for his benefit. And what we do is we have somebody else in charge of it. Whenever the trustee uses the money, it has to be for the benefit of that child, but he doesn't control it and he doesn't have ownership of it. So when he gets sued, or when he gets divorced, or when he has some other issue, those assets aren't his and are no longer subject to his creditors. So it's a great way to provide some additional protection in that way. So even better, when he passes away, those assets are not includable in his estate for calculating his estate taxes. So we give, let's say, the orthopedic surgeon is worth $10 million when he dies. Mom and dad leave him $5 million when they die, right? So that's not included in his $10 million. That $5 million that they leave him, right? Orthopedic surgeon lives another 30 years. That $5 million grows to $30 million. When he dies and it all goes down to the grandkids, that whole $30 million is not going to be subject to estate taxes. Pretty cool, right? Now let's go to the special needs child, right? What is what?
Subject to estate tax.
So all the money that he earned during his lifetime, right? So the orthopedic surgeon, that's his money. One is, essentially what we're saying is, instead of mom and dad giving it to him directly so that the surgeon owns it, we're saying we're giving it to an entity that's legally required to manage it for the orthopedic surgeon. So the orthopedic surgeon, when he gets his paycheck from, Little Company of Mary, right? Then that's his money and subject to his estate taxes. But we've already applied mom and dad's exemption, and we've essentially tied it like a balloon to the inheritance that we've passed down to the orthopedic surgeon. And so that money can continue to grow without being subject to estate taxes because mom and dad don't die twice. You know what I mean? When they pass it down to him, that's the IRS's one bite at the apple. They've applied their exemption to it already. And so once they've passed it to them, they don't die again. But when somebody dies, that's when the IRS gets to apply the estate tax.
That's why you need professionals.
Yeah. A trust vehicle, the cash flow, let's say, parent to your child, how many generations does that trust then exist, or how does it?
That's a great question. So it depends. So trusts can last for a very, very long time, but not all trusts are designed to last for a very long time. And there are limitations on how long a trust can actually last. So every state has different rules, but the bane of every law school student's estate planning class is something called the rule against perpetuities. And the rule against perpetuities is an old common law policy, which is essentially an expiration date on a trust. So as a matter of public policy, people didn't want trusts to last forever because we don't want wealthy families like the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts to accumulate these assets for several generations, essentially in perpetuity. So every state has different rules on when a trust must expire. So in California, it's 21 years beyond any life in being at the time the trust becomes irrevocable. So with a minimum of 90 years. So in California, you're guaranteed, if you wanted a trust to last as long as possible, it's guaranteed to last a minimum of 90 years. The maximum would be 21 years beyond the life of the last beneficiary who was alive at the time that the trust became irrevocable. So example, mom and dad create a trust for their 3 kids and 3 grandkids. And those are all the only beneficiaries alive at that time. And they say, we want this thing to last forever. And so that trust goes, let's say all the kids pass away at some point, and then the last grandchild passes away 100 years later, right? The trust can then last 21 years beyond that. So that's how long it can last. Yes?
Can you add more people? Once you have established a trust, can you add more kids or spouses or whatever it is?
Yeah, so Edward, that's a good, Eduardo. So the question is essentially what you're asking is, how can you change beneficiaries of a trust, or can you add people to it, right? So the answer depends on the terms of the trust. But usually, when people create a revocable trust, that's your everyday kind of basic estate plan. That's designed so that the creators can change it while they're still alive and able to do so. So during their lifetime, if they have more kids or if they want to add other beneficiaries, they can always swap people out or add people in. However, when the creators die, usually that trust becomes irrevocable. Although there are situations where they might give some other third party the ability to appoint other beneficiaries down the road. That's also an advanced tactic, but yeah.
And also, maybe an obvious question for some of them, not for me. The revocable living trust and the will, what's the difference?
Okay, Eduardo. So the question is, what's the difference between a will and a revocable living trust? Does everyone here has heard of a will? Yeah? Everyone here has heard of a trust at the very least? Okay. So a will and a trust are oftentimes confused for one another. A lot of times people use that term interchangeably, but there are very significant differences. So a will is essentially a letter that you're writing to a judge. And you're basically saying, dear judge, when I die, all my stuff is going to end up in your courtroom, and this is how I want you to divide everything up. So a will is essentially an instruction that you're giving to the probate court as to how you distribute your stuff. And the reason why a will has to go through probate is because most people, when they take title to assets, they usually acquire those assets in their own name, right? So if I buy a house, my name is on the deed. I buy a car, my name is on the pink slip. I open up bank accounts or investment accounts, and my names are on those accounts. So with a house, my name is on the deed. It says Brian Chow is the legal owner of the house. That means I can do anything with that property while I'm alive because I'm the legal owner. So if I decide, Anthony, hey man, you're super cool, I want to give you my house. So I sign a deed, transfer it over to Anthony, and now he owns the house. I want to go take out a loan, go down to B of A or More Financial and get a hard money loan. I don't know. So that all works out really well while I'm alive. But if I die, I no longer have any actual authority to make any decisions, but I'm the only person with any legal authority since I'm the person listed on the document. Since nobody else is me, no one else has the authority to do anything with that property, so it's just going to sit there. So at that point, it falls to the state to figure out what to do with my stuff. So the probate court is the arm of the state that comes in and gathers up all my assets and tries to figure out what to do everything. The problem with probate is we got to go to court. And when you go to court, things become very expensive, very time-consuming, and public. So those are 3 big reasons why people generally want to avoid probate. Okay, so a will, Eduardo, is designed to go through probate. A living trust is a separate legal entity that we create to hold our assets. So instead of owning everything in my name, I now transfer ownership of my assets to my living trust. So my living trust is now entitled to my house, my rental properties, my insurance, my financial accounts, my other investments. And during my lifetime, I'm managing everything. But if I die, I had the foresight to appoint successor trustees or vice presidents who can step in and manage things. So let's say I appoint David as my vice president. I'm not around. David now steps up into my place. You're my Mike Pence, right? If I'm gone, you're stepping into my place.
Tough.
He now.
The purpose of this argument
Yeah.
is I would be your Mike Pence.
So he then has the legal authority to carry out the terms of the trust, right? So if my trust says my house goes to my son, David now has the authority to sign all the documents on behalf of my trust, transfer the property from my trust to my son. I'm then able to accomplish a couple of very important things. One is I'm able to appoint somebody who knows my situation, who I actually trust to carry out my wishes, rather than leaving it to a judge to make those decisions. Number two, we're able to accomplish everything outside of the probate process. Everything's privately administered, so it's the only people that can see what's going on are going to be my natural born heirs, in this case my kids. It's also much less expensive and much less time consuming.
This question about exemption, because that's something very dynamic. I remember years back, the exemption was $1 million.
Yes.
So at the time you have $2 million.
Yeah.
The salesperson comes in and says, how do we shelter the actual $1 million?
Yeah.
So now you make $2 million. The law catch up with you.
Yes.
Right? So you keep on doing all of that, and the law is just leave you behind. So all the work you did, as of now, that's $5.5 million. Right? So see, the work I did 10 years ago is useless. But now let's say I have $7 million.
Yep.
Right now it's $5.5 million. Now Trump said he's going to get rid of that.
Yeah.
Right? But then 4 years.
Trump says a lot of things.
So how do you plan in that environment?
Yeah, so the question is, the laws are constantly changing. Case in point, the estate tax exemption, right? The amount that you can pass on to your loved ones. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was $1 million. Now it's $5.5 million. In the mid 90s, it was $600,000 was the exemption amount. So, and the rates have changed a lot. So it used to be 55%. It's now down to 40. It went down to 35%. Now it's back up to 40%. So it changes a lot over time. So thank God for Congress, because if the laws weren't constantly changing, Michelle and I, we probably wouldn't have a job. But what it highlights is, what your question really highlights is the importance of having quality advisors that you have an ongoing relationship with. Because a lot of times people think of estate planning like a one and done thing, like, woo, I finally got together and got my trust. Now I can put it on my bookshelf and I don't have to think about it for another 30 years and I can rest in peace. Well, that's really not the case, because whether it's tax laws changing, whether it's your personal financial situation changing, maybe you've acquired a ton more real estate, maybe you've started a business that's hugely successful, maybe you've had a kid that you married some terrible banshee woman that you hate, and you want to make sure that you're protecting those assets. Those things do change over time. So it's important to have somebody that you trust, that you review things with on a regular basis, to make sure that as your situation evolves, that your estate plan, your asset protection plan, your tax planning all evolves with that. So
speaking of tax planning, so Kyle, when you have someone who comes in who's a real estate investor looking to buy assets, and has questions about the longevity of owning that stuff, what are some of the questions you're asking? What is some of the conversation and dialogue you're having with your clients?
Yes, I think reiterating that there's no cookie cutter solutions to this stuff, that really everything is tailored to whatever the individual facts and circumstances are of the client. So, and constantly revisiting those facts and circumstances is critical to the long-term success of whatever that plan looks like. So having close relationships with your advisors that you're revisiting is hugely important. It's always one of my first questions is, do you have a trust? When did you set it up? Have you revisited it? You've got to be constantly keeping on the cutting edge of whatever the current playing field that we're looking at is. On the tax planning side, I think I really like looking at what are we defining as the long-term goals and then working backwards from there to figure out what path to take in the immediate future. So there's so much of, you can get caught in the weeds of, trying to save tax dollars here or there and reducing effective tax rates, but it's easy to lose sight of those larger picture goals and aspirations that you have for your own personal finances. So I think by really having in-depth conversations about where you want your heirs to be, 30 years from now when you're passing away, and what you want your estate to look like and how you want it managed, is critically important to figuring out what's the first step that we take to get there. So looking at not only kind of what's in play right now, but where we want to get to, both 5, 10, 30 years, whatever the timeline is, and then utilizing that long-term goal to again create a cohesive plan that fits in with all of these different puzzle pieces that come into play. And a lot of that can take a lot of entity structure and selection. So going back to kind of multi-generational ways of handling real estate, one pretty common structure is having an LLC that might own investment property that you have multi-generational owners of. So that can look like, your kids could be members of an LLC that owns a rental property that the family as a unit has purchased effectively. So that's an interesting tool that can have some really fun long-term consequences to it as far as tax planning and estate planning. If the assets are held in a entity that your kids are already owners of effectively. That takes away from some of the other estate planning and step-up and basis rules that again, we've skirted around here. But it does allow for your kids to participate in real estate investments that you're currently working on as well, which can be an exciting way to share your love of real estate with the next generation too, and kind of build out a family portfolio as a business of real estate investing.
And I would say to jump piggyback on Kyle real quick is in that situation, Kyle is talking about gifting a portion of some of the entities that you own so that your kids can participate in that management as well, or at least participate in the distributions that come from that LLC. And that there are trade-offs to that, right? Because you may be foregoing a portion of a step up in basis, but I think the important takeaway is there is no right or wrong answer. It's really figuring out what makes sense for the client, because in many cases it does make sense to gift a portion of those assets to the kids, especially when you have higher net worth individuals. You prefer for that asset to be appreciating in your children's estate rather than in yours if you think you're going to owe money in estate taxes when you pass away.
Yeah, because you're looking at 40% taxes on state taxes over a certain threshold, and then you're looking at the capital gains that you're giving up. The long-term capital gains that, you'd be giving up by giving it to your kids, because you don't get that step up in basis anymore when you pass. So all of a sudden, you're looking at long-term capital gains rate versus estate tax rates, and it becomes a big math problem. And that's why I think it's really important to have, your estate planning attorney and your CPA working together on your plan and constantly getting these types of updates for when you have life changes, when you have children, when you have a new business you're starting, you buy more real estate. I mean, all this stuff changes constantly, so it becomes very difficult to do it once and set it and forget it type of thing. And tell me if I'm wrong or not. Does IRAs and retirement accounts, do those get put into estate plans and to trusts as well, or are those secondary? You want to talk?
Well, an IRA is like a trust, and so it doesn't, and you can nod and tell me, but usually they don't go into the trust. The trust is sometimes the beneficiary if the attorney thinks that's a good idea. But an IRA is like a trust. So if somebody owns an IRA, they pass away, their beneficiaries receive that money in the form of an inherited IRA, and then they've got some choices of what they can do at that time. It depends upon whether they're a spouse or a non-spouse, and they've got some choices. They can take it over a 5-year term, or sometimes they have to take the RMD as based on the lifetime of the deceased.
Which is a required minimum distribution.
Right, a required minimum distribution. So if someone passes away and you receive their IRA in the form of an inherited IRA, you may have to make a withdrawal every year. There's a schedule of how, what you the multiplier to multiply the amount by.
Right, you don't get to wait until you turn 70 and a half.
Right. So you're pulling out a little bit every year.
So Connor, what if I have an IRA and I own hard assets in it, right? I own some real estate and I pass away.
Right.
How do my kids take out the required minimum distributions if I own hard assets and not cash? How do you get around
Right, a
that?
lot of times they'll liquidate the assets. We had this man opened in the county, he was literally a rocket scientist, and I had a lot of fun talking to him, setting up the account.
Welcome to, welcome to the South Bay. There are a dime a dozen around here.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
But he was
Oh,
much
another
older than
rocket
you.
scientist. Rocket scientists and realtors, a lot of those in the South Bay.
And he was already 70, and then soon after he passed away, and so his two sons were the beneficiaries. And it was funny because, amusing that the man wasn't gone more than a day before one of the sons was on the phone. Where's my money? And so what happened is those two. It was 50-50. They're 50-50 beneficiaries. So two inherited IRAs were open, one for each son, and they received their pro rata, amount into each IRA. Well, one son just cashed it out, just took it and cashed it out. And then what the other son did is took it over his father's lifetime. So he had to take an RMD, a withdrawal from the IRA every year based on the age his father would have been that year. So it's a required minimum distribution until the account runs down to zero. So these are some choices that you have. Yeah.
So considering the IRA, so I'm a father, so I have children again.
Yeah.
So again, I'm getting a little bit. So I have exactly the same situation, and for me, on my IRA money, I'm starting to move that from the IRA hard asset. A portion of it go to my Roth IRA.
You're converting.
I'm converting gradually so that it doesn't hit me that hard.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing right around.
That's a tax strategy.
Or make less money. Make less money and then pull more out.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Either now or later. So, but my question is that it used to be a very popular strategy that if you exceed the exemption amount, the insurance guy will come in and say, we'll do an irrevocable life insurance trust. Then you pay.
You want to come up and grab a mic?
I'm just asking, is that because the guy, I did that one time, then I abolished it, then last year, the same salesperson came, and this year, so we said, okay, maybe next year Trump, come on board. I said, doesn't that invalidate what you're selling me? Because I don't have that property anymore if he passed the law.
But it's not just.
That maybe Democrat will reverse that. So is that still a valid strategy that people talk about insurance?
Yes. Yeah.
Still valid?
So a couple of comments. It is still a valid strategy. So what was your name? Andy. So what Andy was referring to is something called an irrevocable life insurance trust. So, and his question is it still a valid strategy? And the answer as an attorney is pretty much always, it depends. But generally speaking, for a certain percentage of the population, the irrevocable life insurance trust is a very important asset tax planning tool. So we all remember the estate tax, right? When you die, if you're worth more than $5.5 or $11 million, the government's going to try to take 40% of everything you pass on to your loved ones. So when you have a lot of hard assets, like most real estate investors are maybe 90% real estate, 10% liquid cash, or for business owners, maybe even more so. And the issue is, let's say we've got a $20 million hotel, and that's the main asset. And when I pass away, let's say me and my wife pass away, that leaves roughly another $10 million that's subject to a 40% tax. So that means that my estate has to come up with $4 million to pay to the IRS within 9 months of the passing of the second of myself and my spouse. So that's a big chunk of money, and all we've got is this hotel. This is our family heirloom, family legacy asset that we want to pass on for generations. We don't want to have to sell it, especially not within 9 months. I mean, if we're up against the gun, then that means we've got to sell it at a great discount to move this thing, right? So in order to deal with that, a lot of times people will utilize insurance. So I might say, let me purchase some insurance. My wife and I will purchase a second to die policy. So when the second of us passes away, there will be a payout of $4 million. Oh, that sounds amazing, but that's too good to be true, because guess what? If my wife and I own that insurance, the proceeds from that insurance are considered a part of my estate. So instead of having $20 million, I now have $24 million, and now I have another $1.6 million of taxes. So in order to get around that, I'll create an irrevocable trust. And so this is different from your normal everyday living trust in the sense that it's designed so that my wife and I have very limited ability or no ability to change it. And so the benefit there is I no longer, once I give it away, I don't have the ability to pull it back into my estate. So I basically I transfer some money into this insurance policy or into this trust. The trust then purchases an insurance policy on my wife and I. And every year, we gift money to this irrevocable trust to pay the premiums. But when I die, all of those assets now are owned and are paid out by into this irrevocable trust, which I don't have, which isn't in my name. So it's no longer subject to that 40% tax. At that point, then, when I pass away, my irrevocable trust has $4 million, which it then uses to purchase a portion of my hotel so that my estate now has the liquidity to pay the estate taxes, and both trusts pass the hotel onto my children in accordance with whatever wishes I've set forth. So yes, it's a delicate dance that we dance with the IRS, but it's a proven strategy. Yep.
You also forgot.
Oh, Rick, rocket scientist.
Finish something.
Okay.
I'm saying that you're assuming there's no estate tax.
I'm assuming there is no, Jeff, so he said, assuming that there is no state estate tax. That is true. In California, there is no state estate tax, but although there may be, if Trump abolishes the federal estate tax, then California has talked about instituting their own state estate tax. But different states also can apply additional estate taxes. Like for instance, if you live in Oregon, Oregon applies an estate tax above net worth over $1 million. In New Jersey, where I'm from, there's also an estate tax, so I'm trying to convince my parents to move out here. Yes, Rick.
Okay. I have a family trust that owns all my personal property and my businesses.
Yep.
Okay, I also have both self-directed and traditional retirement accounts that are separate. They're not held in the trust. Mm-hmm. I've set the beneficiaries for those accounts to be, my wife and my children. Let's say my wife is out of the equation. Let's say she's out of the situation. Right?
Let's fantasize about that.
Yeah. Is it better to make the beneficiary of those retirement accounts trust?
Rick, the answer is it depends. But, so, and actually Karin alluded to this a little bit earlier. So typically with the retirement accounts, the trust won't own it while you're living, just because the retirement account is tied to your life expectancy. So as a matter of just IRS rules or IRS policy, it has to be owned by the individual taxpayer. But yes, you can appoint beneficiaries of a retirement account. Oftentimes people will appoint individuals like their children or their spouse, and in some cases they may appoint a trust in certain situations where, let's say, you have minor children and you don't want them to get the money access to the money right when they turn 18 or 21, or if you have children that are just very irresponsible, or you're passing a very large sum of money down to them, then in certain cases you may set up trusts to hold their individual inheritances. Usually not the best idea to just do a blanket distribution to, let's just say, a family trust, because there may be, in many cases, it could trigger some negative tax consequences. Because let's say you've got the rocket scientist family living trust, right? And your 3 kids are the beneficiaries. I know, clairvoyant. But so if you name your trust as the beneficiary, the IRS doesn't want to track down everybody's trusts to figure out who the underlying life expectancies are, right? Because if you leave it to your children, typically speaking, unless you hit a certain age, your children can defer most of the taxes on their inherited IRAs, right? So they only pull out a small amount every year based on their life expectancy. So they can defer most of that money, and that money can grow so that when they reach retirement, hopefully they've got a larger retirement nest egg, right? So if you're going to leave it to your living trust, because the IRS doesn't want people to do that, because they don't want to chase down every trust to figure out who each beneficiary's life expectancy is, they'll say, look, if it's not a qualifying trust, and there's technical requirements for this, if you don't hit these certain requirements, we're going to make the trust pull all the money out within 5 years. That's not good, right? You're blowing a big tax deferral opportunity. If it is a qualifying trust, which most revocable living trusts are, then they say if you're just naming that trust on the beneficiary form and we can't tell who the underlying beneficiaries are, we're just going to use the life expectancy of the oldest child. So if you have triplets, who cares? No big deal. If you have one kid from a prior marriage that's 35 and another one that's 2, well, the youngest child might have a problem with that, right? But those are things that you can work around by individually naming those beneficiaries. So you create a separate trust for each child and say the trust for Susan, the trust for Jimmy, and the trust for Billy as set up under the Rocket Scientist Living Trust. Then the IRS knows exactly who the underlying beneficiaries are, but the trust can still manage those assets for their life expectancy in accordance to the terms of whatever you've set.
You have anything to say about from the tax point of view?
Not particularly. I mean, I think that a lot of the trust instruments just need to be very specifically tailored to your exact circumstances. So, yeah, age of kids being that gap makes a very different plan of attack than having triplets.
What are the tax reporting requirements for the different vehicles? Like, do you have to file paperwork for trusts? Irrevocable, revocable?
I think, Richard, guess what the answer is? It depends. It depends on how you set up the trusts. So some trusts, and most revocable living trusts are set up as what are called grantor trusts. So just like what Kyle was referring to before about, if the IRA owns a single member LLC, all the actions of that LLC just flow directly through to the IRA. Same thing with a revocable living trust or a grantor trust. Basically, when let's say you set up a trust for yourself that you manage and you control, as far as the IRS is concerned, they're not even aware that your living trust exists because everything just shows up on your 1040. So if you own rental property and it's just held in your trust, it's just going to show up on your Schedule E. However, if you create an irrevocable trust, like Andy's irrevocable life insurance trust, or let's say you create a trust that you're holding, an irrevocable trust that you're holding for the benefit of your kids because you want to gift some properties for their benefit, but don't want them to control it, right? Then that would have, typically speaking, would have its own taxpayer identification number. It would file its own tax return. And the taxes would be calculated based on the amount of income that the trust retains year over year. So let's say the trust earns $30,000, but $20,000 of it gets distributed out to the kids. Then there's a K-1 to the kids, and then the kids report the individual income on their own returns. The additional $10,000 that the trust retained in that year would then be paid on the trust return, which is usually at a much higher tax rate.
Typically, a grantor trust won't have its own separate tax ID, so the IRS isn't tracking any filing requirements for it because it's all going to default to your own personal Social Security number.
Speaking of some of the kids and getting taxed that way and using some strategies while you're alive other than the trust strategy to mitigate taxes, one of the biggest strategies you can use is finding ways of paying your kids and then contributing that money to an IRA or 401k for your kids and things like that. Kyle, how far can you push this when you're paying your kids? And can I pay my 2-year-old for modeling pictures and saying it's helping me sell real estate? Or I mean, what are you seeing out there on this side? And how do you document that they're actually doing active labor for you? I mean, I've heard people push it and say, I don't care if they're 1 year old. And I've thought about the modeling strategy going, I'm taking their pictures and putting it on my website and in my presentation so that I can say, I'm paying you $5,000 for these pictures, kid. I'm going to go put that into an IRA, a self-directed IRA, and then help them invest it and things like that. What kind of strategies do you see on that side?
Yeah, so our good friends at the IRS Long Beach and El Segundo offices here would want you to treat any transaction with your kids as if they were an unrelated third party. So as long as you're using that as a guideline, you can't really go wrong. I mean, there's still some prohibitive transactions you got to stay away from, especially as it relates to retirement plans. But if you have an active trader business and you want to pay your kids for services or employ them in some form or fashion, generally speaking, as long as you're doing it, at the same rate that you would pay, one of their friends or an unrelated person.
So 30,000 for one picture is not good then,
Not for your kids.
40 then, I'm telling you, my son is so damn cute, you have no idea.
So yeah, so as long as you're, it's very dependent on.
Yeah, right. Comps.
So when you're doing that though, on that strategy, what are some of the documentation things that you should be backing yourself up for to be able to do that legitly? Because the whole goal is you want it to be active ordinary income, because then you can go contribute it to the self-directed 401k or IRA, and then be able to get that money in there and not pay the tax on even if it's $5,000 a year or whatever it is. You want it to be above the exemption amount, and then do a traditional IRA or Roth IRA or something like that.
Yeah, I love the comps comment there, because that's exactly the type of things you want to document. So kind of getting a sense of what the fair market value of those services would be, documenting that, and then if you're ever audited, you have something to back it up, at least of how you came up with those numbers. That doesn't guarantee, every auditor is going to approach every tax situation in their own unique, special way. So, there's, regardless of how well you button that kind of stuff up, it's something that IRS likes to look at, just because it's an area that's rife for opportunity of abuse. So, if you're paying your kids, document as much as you can by kind of looking at the fair market value, that kind of stuff, and then hook it up.
And how do you have to deal with payroll tax issues and sometimes when you pay your kids those types of things, or can you structure them as subcontractors, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that gets into all kinds of other fun stuff, questions there. But so yeah, first and foremost, kind of worker classification. So if they're an independent contractor or an employee, all kinds of rules and regulations on that front that you'd want to be careful to button up. Won't have to get into too much detail there, but if they're going to be, like, let's say that you have a 401k plan under your active trader business, and you want to pay them $20,000 so they can defer 18 of that straight into their own 401k, you would be picking up payroll taxes on that. Obviously, you're also getting a deduction for the 20 grand that goes in there too, so that's going to more than make up for any payroll tax overhead, which is also deductible anyway. But yeah, it's a pretty common strategy for high net worth to employ their kids, especially if they have a retirement plan under one of their entities that can.
Isn't it very popular for French politicians too? I heard that's
Yeah.
Isn't there a $7,000 a year annual exclusion for each spouse they give to their kids?
It's more. 14 per spouse. 14 per spouse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So can't you just use that?
So yeah, so that's the gift tax exemption, annual gift tax exemption. So if you gift $14,000 to anyone, you can do that. I could give $14,000 to everyone in this room, not have to report any of that to the IRS.
So you can go up to
But that's not a deduction to
you can't fund like a 401k or an IRA with it because it's not ordinary income.
You have the kid has to be making ordinary income, like active income he's working for, in order to contribute it to the IRA to not have to pay tax on that. And then, in a gift situation, if I wanted to gift my kid money, I'm not getting a deduction. If I pay him money, then that's when he can put it in his IRA or 401k, and I'm getting the deduction for it at the higher tax bracket. So that's kind of the whole plan. Karin, when you deal with kids self-directed IRAs, how does that work if they're 5 and
Right. and their parent signs as their guardian.
Okay, so they sign it and they help control the asset and then invest it.
Because of course now, say it's a self-directed IRA and this child is now 15 and they've been putting in $5,500 a year into a self-directed IRA. Now they've got some real money to maybe make a note or something like this. They're under the age of majority. They can't really contract or make those decisions, so the parents are doing it as their guardian.
And is there a way, you'd love to think that every 15-year-old has their head screwed on, or every 18-year-old has their head screwed on straight, but when they're 18, all of a sudden they're legally able to make their own decisions and not have that guardian. Yeah. Is there a way to protect them where the parents can still have the control in that kind of a situation and say, you're 18, you're not making your own investments yet, I'm still going to help you with this and I'm going to control it, versus them saying, no, I'm taking it all out now and ruining the whole idea. So
yeah, so that's a great question, Matt. I'd say there are a couple of ways to do this. One is if you're putting if the asset is already in the child's name, once they hit the age of majority, they're going to be able to control it. But in many cases, obedient children can give their parents power of attorney. So
you're saying beat the kids into submission.
Yeah, or you can use other assets as leverage. Like, hey, if you mismanage if you don't give me power of attorney over this, well, I'm just going to write you out of the will or the trust. That's a way to do it. So, but another important takeaway from this is if you have minor children, it's really, you kind of take it for granted, right? Like, okay, I'm the guardian, I'm legally responsible for this person, I get to make decisions for them. Once they become 18, they're adults, and they now have the ability to make their own decisions. And the issue that often comes up is if you have a child, let's say that's away at college on spring break, and he slips and falls off a balcony and hurts himself and is now incapacitated, there's no presumption as a legal adult that you as the parent have any legal right to make medical decisions or to manage his finances, etc. It's probably a good idea for them to have that documentation, like a healthcare directive and a power of attorney, maybe a very basic or simple will, whereby he appoints the parents so that if anything happens to that child, that young adult, that their parents can easily step in and make those decisions. Because while the hospital might allow them to do it, there's no guarantee that the hospital would. So, yeah. So, yep, in the back.
Yeah, it's not going down the rabbit hole question. Just kind of wondering, I run into a lot of people who might be nearing retirement or past retirement or being forced to start taking some withdrawals from their account, but they're thinking, I'd really like to invest in real estate to create something for my children and kind of create that legacy and make some money on the side to supplement my retirement. And the question they always ask is, where do we start? How do we start getting this going? And I'm guessing you need to talk to all three of you, right? But can you kind of go through that process at a real high level?
Karen, can you talk about that?
What I see is that people sit here in these chairs at this meeting and other real estate investment club meetings to get ideas. And maybe to meet each other, and maybe there's a deal, and you've got a deal, and then he's got some money, and you need, or maybe you need like $10,000 extra to finish the flip you're doing. He's got $10,000 in an IRA, his IRA lends you the money. And start off small like that. In fact, I have some on my website. I did some Blog Talk Radio interviews, and Aaron Mazzarello, he started off doing mobile home loans, like little mobile home loans in an IRA, in a Roth, and I think he took his Roth up to over $1 million, just starting off small and building up. So you talk to other people and find out how they do it.
And I was sort of like interfacing with you guys up here, to go to the person from Udirect, or to go to Karen from Udirect, the car, and say, hey, I want to do this, and then you say, go to CPA, how's that?
Well, okay, so you say this is what you want to do. So before you open a self-directed IRA account, you can do this without an idea of what you want to invest in, but it's better for you if you know what you want to do. Because the money's going to be sitting in there, not you're just earning 0.1%. It's not going to be at risk in the market, but it's not going to be really gaining anything. So you want to have an idea of what you want to invest in going into it. So, and I can't give investment advice or tell you what to do investment-wise. So you really want to find that asset first.
So yeah, getting educated on the investments in themselves is a first step, because you can't invest and take control of your own retirement without having at least a basic knowledge, right? But the second thing, I think, can you talk about what the process is to open an account, and then also what the process is when you're investing that money? Because I think it's unclear the specific paperwork that goes into it and how that works. And then can you also, I'm saying the investment process, getting the money in there, how to make an investment, and then how it works with the money going back and forth.
Sure. Well, let's chunk it down into the simplest possible explanation. It's really a 3-step process. You open the IRA, and that's a process. You fill out the form. We need some documentation from you, and that takes about 24 hours. Once we get that documentation from you, we open your account the day. Boom, that happens. The second step with a self-directed IRA is to put money into it. Maybe coming from an IRA, maybe like an IRA to IRA transfer, might be a rollover from a previous employer plan. Those take about 2 weeks. We're waiting for another custodian to move money over. So if you're thinking timeline-wise, how long does it take? It's going to be about 2 weeks for that other custodian to move your money over. And if they're writing a check, it's even longer. So there's that. But then when you go to invest your funds, we can be looking at the documentation while we're waiting for the money to come over. But say your IRA is already funded, and now here's a brand new deal. You've got $100,000 in your IRA or whatever you have. Here's a new deal. Typically, the turnaround time for us is 24 to 48 hours to review and fund a deal. But every deal, it depends on the deal. If it's like something like a note that's pretty straightforward, we're going to look and make sure it has the major elements of a note. Review it, and usually within a day or two, it's funded. Yeah.
And can you also talk about, I mean, we talked about prohibited transactions and things like that. I think it was very, I think, unclear for everybody in the room to understand, because you talked about a lot of the scary aspects of it, of course. Yeah. Can you talk about what you can and also what you can't do, like as far as a general overall idea?
Sure, and again, it's a simple, if you think about it in three different things. So first up, you can't benefit personally from your IRA. So your IRA doesn't make a loan to you. Your IRA, and also some people are disallowed to your IRA, your lineal ascendants and descendants, right? So none of these people can benefit from your IRA today. They can benefit when you pass away, but not now. So none of these people can benefit from your IRA. People will call about this time of year when they're thinking about paying for tuition in the fall, and they think, can my IRA lend my son or daughter money to go to college in the fall? No, child is a disallowed person up and down the family tree. They're disallowed, so your IRA cannot benefit them today. That's one kind of prohibited transaction. When a disallowed person receives present benefit, okay, that's one. Number two is that your IRA doesn't buy, sell, or exchange assets between the plan, the IRA, and any of these people. So your IRA doesn't buy a house from your parents. Your IRA doesn't sell a house to your children. I had this call today. Someone wanted to know how he buys a house from his own IRA, and I explained, you're disallowed. You don't buy the house from your IRA. You get an appraisal and you withdraw it. That's how you do it. So that's number two, prohibited transaction. You don't buy, sell, or exchange these assets. You can transfer upon death. That's allowed. But while you're alive, you're not doing business with these disallowed people. So the third kind of prohibited transaction is that these disallowed people, which also include any like a fiduciary and so forth, anybody offering services to the plan, they're also disallowed. They cannot provide goods, services, and facilities to the plan. I'll go back to this guy today who wanted to buy this private stock, but then he was going to work for the company and be as an advisor. And I said, no, this is a classic prohibited transaction. So your IRA can't own an asset like private stock in a company, and then you provide services to the plan that increase the value of that asset. So your sweat equity is increasing the value of your asset. That's disallowed. So the same thing if your IRA owns a house. You're not going to go out there swinging the hammers or mowing the lawn. You're not going to send your son out there to mow the lawn. He's disallowed, so he's off the hook. Yay, So here's one real life situation. We had somebody who is a realtor, and they were buying a house in their IRA. So we're taking a look, what the car form is like. It's like an encyclopedia. But we finally get to the end, and we see that the broker of record is his dad. Fail. No.
How far out? How far removed does someone have to be to not be a disqualified?
Right. It's parents and grandparents and their spouses. You and your spouse, your children, your grandchildren, and their spouses. You think about it this is very easy for you to contemplate, because if you passed away, who would get your assets first? It's those people.
It's the lineal descendants, the parents and kids, but brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles.
If you have a really good cousin friend.
Yeah. Or your brothers and sisters, no problem. Yeah. So with this person who was trying to buy this asset, they had to have, not only did the dad want to be the broker, or the broker, also wanted a commission. So he wanted to benefit personally. So he's breaking rule number 1 and number 3, offering services to the plan.
What about parents-in-laws as well?
Yeah, well, these are gray areas, stepchildren and parents-in-laws. So say, for example, my IRA, or say your IRA, lends your mother-in-law $100,000 on an unsecured note. How do you like that? And then, wouldn't you love that? Okay, so you just did that, but you would.
I feel really bad charging my mother-in-law like 80% interest on that.
But you're a giver, and so then for Christmas that year your mother-in-law buys you a brand new $80,000 Tesla. Thank you. Did you just benefit from your IRA? Maybe, right? So a mother-in-law, so you could tie a personal benefit into that.
Yeah, you just want to be really, really careful about that personal benefit. And, a lot of people will tell you that you can buy a property at the same time with your IRA and things like that, and it gets really, really hairy. So, yeah, be very careful with any of that stuff. I wouldn't recommend any of that, because if you get present benefit, and present benefit could be considered, if you have $50,000 and your IRA has $50,000 and the property costs $100,000, and you don't have the $100,000 yourself, then you're getting present benefit because you couldn't buy that house without your IRA.
In fact,
so very,
and there are self-directed IRA companies that will tell you you can do this, and it's horrible because people walk out there thinking they can, and they get in all kinds of trouble. There was a Department of Labor ruling in the year 2000, so it's called 2000-10. It said you can co-invest with yourself as long as you're not receiving personal benefit, as long as you could have done it otherwise, you just chose to use your IRA. Why would you do that? So you bought this house together with yourself and your IRA together. Now you get a red check. You just earn money and put it in your pocket. How do you say you didn't personally benefit from that? It's as far as the income is concerned. It's just, I would never do that. I would never do that.
It's kind of the wild, wild west, though, because there's no one looking over your shoulders for these transactions. So whether you're disclosing these to your advisors, IRS is installing video cameras outside of the rental property. You buy your IRA and looking at who's mowing the lawn. They're relying on their audit staff to track these kind of things and pick them up, which is few and far between, to be honest. But it's still something that when you're rolling the dice on your own retirement at the end of the day, where if it is found to be a prohibited transaction, they're going to snag a whole hell of a lot of that money that was otherwise.
But I'll tell you the truth. UDirect IRA Services got audited a couple years ago. And so I had to sit and spend a couple hours explaining to the auditor what self-directed IRAs were and how they worked. So they don't really know.
I love it. Have you dealt with this kind of issue?
Why didn't you leave him in the dark?
No, he loved me, and he told my CPA, told Matt and Amanda that I got an A+ on my audit.
Nice.
Should ask for some referrals.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Kathleen.
Yeah, I have a question about inherited IRAs. So if, let's say a grandparent sets up an IRA with beneficiaries being with grandchildren, and that IRA is set up as a traditional IRA with a brokerage company. But let's just say, because I heard this is a doable strategy, set it up as a Roth. So you have the kids being able to inherit that IRA on that tax-free basis. But it's sitting with a traditional brokerage. Is the child, once that grandchild inherits that IRA, can that grandchild move it over to self-directed, or
Yes.
would it need to be established initially as a self-directed IRA?
It doesn't have to be. No, they could move it over to a self-directed IRA. But I'll tell you what, after years of experience, this is what we've decided to do. And we have something called a suitability form, right? Because with the Roth, it's different. You don't have to take RMDs. And whether it's with a traditional brokerage house or a self-directed IRA, the rules are the same as far as the IRS is concerned. But if you're going to self-direct your IRA, and it's an inherited IRA, we're going to give you a suitability form, because if you don't take your RMDs, the penalty is 50% of what that RMD would have been. Is that crazy?
It sucks.
And so we don't want you to open this inherited IRA and invest in non-liquid assets and not be able to take your RMDs. And when we knew full well up front, you were running into this situation.
Karen?
Yes.
Quick question.
Yeah.
If you have a hard asset and you have to take an RMD, can you also distribute just a percentage of the property?
You can, and yes, and that kind of answers a question you asked earlier and I didn't answer. You can, but let's look at this. So you've got this house now. Now you're 70 and a half, and you have to take your RMDs, and all you have is this non-liquid asset. So what you can do is every year the IRA has to pay for an appraisal and a new title report to retitle a portion of that asset to your name personally. You get 1099 for that portion, and you can't have any possession of the property until it's 100% yours, until you've taken 100% possession by withdrawal. So that means every single year your IRA pays for this appraisal.
Yeah.
$500 bucks, and that's
real messy.
Yeah, it's real messy, and so just sell the frickin' asset. That's what I'd say. I mean, make your life, be kind to yourself, and make it as easy as possible. And if it's a Roth, then you're not paying tax.
Think about the tax returns you got to pay for to do that every time,
right,
and the extra work. Kyle, have you ever dealt with any audit on a self-directed IRA before? Or? Yeah, not yet.
No.
Okay, nice.
So 1031s and self-directed IRAs have a lot in common, right? Both are ways to defer. So when we talk about self-directed IRAs, from a 1031 standpoint, as part of a tax strategy where people are looking to defer and then ultimately leave stuff to their children, how does that work like with an estate plan where technically the entity that sells the property has to buy the property? Is the plan the entity that's owning it and exchanging it into the next asset? Is that how you structure that?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah.
Can you explain how that would kind of work?
Yeah. So any 1031 exchange, one of the key requirements is that the title on the first property has to be held the same way on the replacement property as well. So you can't have a house that's in, or an investment property that's in your trust, and then close on a purchase that's in a separate LLC or something like that. It has to be the same taxpayer that's making that exchange.
But to Kyle's point, you could conceivably have the same taxpayer but a different form of title. So for instance, like if I purchased a property or if I 1031 exchange, I actually just had a client do this. He was going through a 1031 exchange. He sold it as an individual, but acquired title to the second property in a single member LLC. But the reason why that worked is because it's a single member LLC, so it's the taxpayer, the ultimate taxpayer is him. Because if it was a multi-member LLC or if it was taxed as a corporation, it would have triggered the 1031 rules. But because the ultimate tax ramification flowed directly to the same investor, it still worked.
So if I'm that single individual, right, and I'm deferring, and all of a sudden I say, wait a minute, I should put my stuff in a trust. I've already done the 1031 exchange. Can I retitle that into the name of the trust? And how long do I have to retitle before I can sell it and then 1031 it again?
Okay, so the answer is if your trust is a grantor trust, which is a normal, everyday revocable living trust, yes, right? You can sell as an individual and take title in the name of your revocable living trust.
No time constraints either.
Yeah.
No time constraints, okay.
Yeah, so, and then you're good to go.
I've been running into a lot of 1031 exchange guys coming to me lately, and what seems to be the common theme is, they're selling a property that's appreciated, obviously, and they're trying not to pay the tax on it. They go sell it, get the loan equal to, the old loan gets by replacement property equal to that, and then down the line, they want to go refinance and pull a bunch of money out, and how long do you typically have to wait to do that, and what are the reasons why? I know this wasn't on the list here, guys, so he didn't know I was going to ask this one. Because they, some people say, oh, wait 3 months, wait 6 months, and I never understood the reasoning why you have to wait.
Yeah, so there is no rule, is the problem. So the IRS has never explicitly stated one way or another how long they want you to hold a property as an investment property before you can do anything related to a 1031 exchange. So they basically have left it wide open to rely on the individual facts and circumstances of that transaction. So if one classic example that went through tax court somewhat recently is there was a taxpayer who had converted a primary residence to a rental property, and it was, I think they only had it as rental for like 3 months or something like that. And typically the kind of common knowledge is hold it for at least a year before you do any 1031 exchange. But if there's a change in financial circumstance, like the real estate market takes a dive and you can't get the rents that you thought you would from this property, and you can document that and then 1031 out of it and go buy something in Arizona instead, where you feel like you're going to get the fair rental rates for that, however much you have in that asset. You can do a faster conversion than would be conventional wisdom to do. So it
comes down to intent, right? It's intent, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So you basically want to document that the intent from day one was to hold it as an investment property, that there may have been some change in financial circumstances that effectuated in a different plan of attack being implemented. But yeah, you want the intent to always be held for investment whenever you're doing it.
Hey Matt, real quick, did you want me to talk a little bit about charitable remainder trust as a tax deferral tool? Do you think that the audience would like that?
Yeah.
A little light conversation there.
Okay. So we've been talking about 1031 exchanges, and 1031 exchanges are a very popular way to defer taxes on sale of real estate. Another way that another tool that people may utilize to sell property and defer capital gains is something called a charitable remainder trust. Anybody ever heard of that before? Yeah, otherwise known as the CRT. So a charitable remainder trust is oftentimes used in a situation where, let's say we have a salty old investor who's got, let's just go back to that $20 million property, and he's saying, I'm so tired of managing this thing. The tenants are always calling me and giving me guff, and like Danny Glover in 48 Hours, I'm too old for this, beep. So he wants to sell this thing, but he's like, I bought this property for a song. I bought it for $2 million. It's now $20 million. I'm going to really take it in the pants from a capital gains purposes. So how do I don't want to take the hit from a cash flow standpoint, but I want to sell this thing. I want to eliminate the management. And so one thing that he might do is, instead of doing a 1031 exchange, because in many cases you're going, out of the frying pan into the fire, you can do something like what's called a charitable remainder trust. So he might say, hey, I have a charity that I really feel strongly about. Name a charity, Dave. Give me a charity.
Red Cross.
Red Cross. I'm really passionate about the Red Cross. So he creates an irrevocable trust, and he gifts his property to the trust, and the terms of the trust say, okay, whatever we transfer in is ultimately going to be transferred to the Red Cross. It's going to be for the benefit of the Red Cross, but for a certain term of years, or for the lifetime of Mr. Investor, this trust is obligated to pay out a certain amount of income to this investor. So what happens is this money gets transferred to the property gets transferred to this irrevocable trust, and because it's held for the benefit of a beneficiary, a charitable beneficiary, the property can be sold without recognizing capital gain. So now what happens is he keeps the whole $20 million, right? That $20 million gets paid back to him over the course of his lifetime at set amounts, or either set amounts or set percentages. And so he keeps the ongoing cash flow. He doesn't take the hit. He doesn't recognize the capital gains, and ultimately whatever's left over goes to charity. So the charity wins, the investor wins, and the only person really losing out is the IRS. Although they actually, yeah. So the IRS picks up a little bit of money on the distributions, but it's chump change compared to what he would have taken on the capital gains. So that's another
pretty common strategy when there's no beneficiaries, or when someone just chooses not to have their beneficiaries inherit a property that they've owned. So it's a way to avoid to allow for the lifestyle to continue, that they can still pay for their ongoing living expenses out of the charitable remainder trust without having this asset depleted, 30%, 35%, 40%, whatever it is, with tax payments.
And you also get an income tax deduction for the charitable deduction, and a lot of times people use the savings on the income tax deduction to purchase an insurance policy, which they then fund into an ILID, or what's known as a wealth replacement trust, so that the insurance makes up or fills in some of the gap to the beneficiaries. So anything that they would have lost out on the gift of the property to charity, they get a lot of that back in cash, which is oftentimes what they want anyways, and the charity gets a benefit as well. So
there's some of the investors that I know, and I think you may have this issue as well. Some parents live internationally and invest here in the U.S., and if they pass away, is there specific changes in some of the estate law limits and things like that when you're dealing with that kind of a situation from an international client here?
Yeah, if you have a non-resident, non-citizen client that owns property here in the United States, they should seriously talk to an estate planning attorney, because the estate tax exemptions are much, much lower for non-resident foreign nationals.
It depends on the state too, as well, or?
So the exemption, if I believe, there are certain assets that are exempt from the exemption, but let's just say real estate, right? I think the estate tax exemption for a non-resident foreign national is $60,000. So you really want to do your planning.
After that, it's a 40% tax then? Wow.
If you don't have property here, let's say my parents, they have property in a foreign country.
Yeah, it's not taxable. It's not going to be subject to the estate tax if they're non-residents. Non-resident, non-citizens.
I don't even have to report that, although the money might go into account, they report it to the United States.
Yes, so when they bring the money over, they have to report it. But if it's not, if they have assets held in a foreign country and they're not citizens or legal permanent residents, then in the event of their passing, there's not going to be an estate tax applied to their foreign assets. Anything that's held here will be subject to their.
How does he get the money non-taxable then if the money comes from his parents? Is it a gift?
I will get the money that I have account in Taiwan. I'm from Taiwan. So let's say I guess I'm
Me too.
here.
Well, my parents are, but yeah.
So the money, I will deposit money into that bank account, and the bank already told me anything activity in that account will be reported here, whatever agreement they have.
Oh, that's just by treaty.
Okay, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Doesn't mean I have to pay tax just because they reported.
You still have FBAR filing requirements, but yeah, there would be no estate tax or inheritance tax on that money.
Yeah, so there's a distinction to be made here about estate taxes and inheritance taxes. So estate taxes are applied to the estate. So it's applied to the person who died. So it's based on how much money you had when you died. Certain states, like I think Oregon or Washington, have an inheritance tax. So it's taxable to the receiver. So if you receive an inheritance more than a certain amount, it's subject to a tax. So
We'll tax both sides.
yeah, huh?
Not in California.
California does not have an estate tax. Not yet. And again, that's all contingent on future events. But California does not have a separate estate tax, although they do share in some of the estate tax revenue that the federal government collects. So.
Because the exemption fluctuates.
Yeah.
So one of the things about this to the kids, strategy-wise, is that let's say when Trump is in charge or when Republican, they keep the thing, no estate tax.
Mm-hmm.
So one strategy could be
transfer everything.
You give the children get all that much money, but then let's say 4 years from now, Jerry Brown left it.
Yeah.
He reversed that. He go back to now 3 billion.
I think it's going to be Oprah, is what I heard. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that if you made a gift over the amount in the future,
would there be a clawback provision or something? Yeah. Probably not. I mean, that seems like that would require a lot of political will, and it would be very unpopular. And this sort of thing has happened before, Andy, as you may remember in 2010. Right, the estate tax was repealed when all the Bush era, at the end of right before all the Bush era tax cuts went off the books. Yeah, so essentially what happened is, the story is when George Bush got elected, right, he instituted all these tax cuts, but the way that they got all of these tax cuts implemented was they didn't have enough of a majority to make it permanent. They could only make it last for 10 years. So at the end of that 10 years, they basically said, well, hey, we have enough votes to repeal the estate tax in 2010, so let's just get rid of it. And so everybody thought for that whole decade that the Congress was going to step in and make some sort of change before 2010. Well, if you remember that time, it was there was a lot of it was a lot of craziness with regards to Congress getting anything done. So they did nothing. So basically, in 2010, there was no estate tax. The current tax rate at the time would have been 55%. So George Steinbrenner, who owns the Yankees, he passed away in 2010, and he was able to pass over $1 billion down to his beneficiaries without being subject to a 55% estate tax. So that was your throw mama from the train year. That was what they were. Yeah.
Great year, Don.
So the flip side of that is his beneficiaries did not get the step up in basis because that was the trade-off. So there was no estate tax, but now if they sell assets, they would have to pay capital gains on it at the original basis. But who cares? Because they can just 1031 it until somebody else dies. So.
All right, so it's 9 o'clock. So actually, it's a little after 9 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. First of all, let's get a round of applause for these guys. Thank you. It's almost like some private consulting, especially with Matt trying to figure out how to pay his kids. So glad you guys are able to make it tonight. So what's going to happen next is we actually have the North Italia, which is the restaurant that's just right over here. We have the patio booked. We've got a bunch of food that we've bought, and we're going to take the networking, instead of doing it in this room, we're going to do it over at North Italia. So we have meetings here tomorrow morning. We have meetings every Thursday morning here. So just go ahead and head over to North Italia. We've got food. It'll be a cash bar on your own. Next month we have, it's about protecting your assets. We've got Steven Spear, who's an attorney. We've got, who else is in that?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah.
There's too many speakers now.
Yeah. So it's all, we actually put it up on Meetup, I believe, a couple of days ago. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and check that out and RSVP for that. And
the end of this month, the last Thursday, I'm doing one in the FIBI Long Beach on how to efficiently manage your rental properties. So we'll talk all about the property management piece of that stuff and trying to teach about that, which is the funnest part about owning real estate, property management.
Which is actually one of the panelists next month is a property manager.
Right.
So yeah.
That's right.
So. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming. We'll see you next month.